Why do you want to be on the school board, and what qualities do you bring to the board?
So I decided to run for school board because as a parent of two kids that are currently in our district schools and just as a community member in the Conejo Valley, I'm really tired of the divisiveness that's been created by our board majority between parents and teachers and students, and disheartened by the culture of fear that we have where people are afraid to speak up about their concerns and their opinions on things. And I want to refocus the board's attention on issues that are directly impacting our students. And we have plenty of those to choose from. We have declining enrollment. We have an achievement gap for 3 categories of our students. We have social emotional needs that need to be met for our kids. And aside from being a parent who's kind of on the front lines of what's going on in our district schools, my professional background as an attorney and with experience working with policy and legislation gives me skills that I think our board really needs. So I know how to negotiate, I know how to forge consensus among opposing viewpoints, and I know how to analyze and ask critical questions about things and think about long-term effects.
You touched on this a little, but what past experiences have prepared you for being on the board?
Yeah, so I actually dating back quite a while now to college. I interned in a local representative's office and then also at the state capitol. And those taught me really good skills. Right from the bat, I had learned how to talk with constituents, especially ones that didn't necessarily agree with the representatives that I was working for, and how important it is to listen to people and hear their concerns. And then going on with my legal career, I was initially a litigator, and that teaches you a lot of skills about having to find consensus among opposing viewpoints and parties who have very different interests, and coming to the table and mediating and finding a solution that works for everybody. And now also in the job I am at in-house, I work with people whose interests and goals are very different than mine as an attorney and looking out for our legal and regulatory interests, but we still have to be able to work together and achieve a common goal. So I think that those are needs that we have on our board. I also have background working with complex budgets, which is really important given our looming budget deficit. And then also I think I bring a background of interest in hearing from our students, which to me personally is very important. That's how I first got my interest in civic responsibility, was through actually a high school project. And so I've carried that with me all of these years, and I think that if we want to know what's happening in our schools, we need someone who's going to go out there and talk to people and find out.
What is your stance on board policy 6161? What changes would you like to see to this policy, if any?
I think the policy should just be done away with. We need to start from scratch. It's unfortunately been an extremely divisive issue unnecessarily in our community over the past year, and it's detracted the attention and time being spent on things that are impacting our students. I hear a lot it framed as an issue of you're either for parents or you're for teachers, and that's just not true. Generally, what's best for our students is working with parents, working with teachers, right? If there was a need, we obviously had an opt-out policy anyway in our district. If there was a need to formalize it, we had teachers that came to the table and a committee that were willing to make a policy in a formalized manner so that an individual who might want to opt out for a personal reason could do so, but it would be done in a way where it wouldn't affect the teacher's ability to teach the rest of the class, right? We have to think about that when we're talking about policy. The policy wasn't well thought out. It was written by one board member. It was passed before the community even had an opportunity to provide input on it. They were, the board majority had requests to slow the process down. It was not implemented in a way that was thought out. And there was even a violation, as we know, of the Brown Act, which is the open meetings policy, which is so important to running a board and making sure that our community knows what's going on and has a role in that policy. So if we have a policy passed by one board member without input from our community, it needs to be scrapped. And we need to start over and get one that's actually a workable solution for our teachers and our students.
What role do you think parents should have in deciding school curriculum choices?
So this is kind of similar to what we were talking about, right? A teacher's role is to develop and implement curriculum. As a parent, I myself, we have a 4th grader and a 6th grader, and I want to know what my children are learning so that we can help them with it, so that we can talk to them about it, so we can put it in context with our own values as a family. But it's really important for kids to know things outside of their bubble. That's what makes us good citizens as we grow up, and it makes us be able to understand those that are not like us. So curriculum should not be developed by board members. We need to be involving our teachers. Parents should be able to come in and express their views and concerns and opinions in an environment that is free from fear and is more collaborative. So when we say it's not just teachers, it's not just parents, it's not just students, we really need to, as a whole in our district, come back to a more collaborative effort and process.
How do you feel about the cooperativeness of the school board currently, and how do you improve it?
So, I don't think there's much cooperation on the board currently, and that's, in my opinion, the biggest problem we have. There are going to be no policies we can implement in an effective manner until we change the structure of the school board. It's good to have people on the board with different backgrounds, with different ideological views. All of that is good. This isn't a conservative versus a liberal thing. This is adults who should be able to speak to each other in a respectful manner, who should be comfortable and secure enough in themselves that they can listen to and take in comments that are different from their own personal views and even consider those ideas. I think when we do that, we come to a place where at the end of the day, we're not going to have policies that everyone agrees with. It's just not realistic. But when we are genuinely involving our community in the process, it makes it much less adversarial, and it looks really bad for our district, frankly. All you have to do is watch one board meeting, and I'm telling you now, there are people outside of our district, I work with people outside of our district that watch our board meetings on video, the live stream. Who watches board meetings for a district that they don't live in, right? That's a horrible sign. And what you're putting out to the public is that the leaders of our district are dysfunctional and can't even speak to each other in a productive manner. That is going to have disastrous effects, and as a parent and a community member, I just find that completely unacceptable.
Do you think our district handles student safety well, and why?
So I am glad to see that the district worked with an outside company to have them come in and evaluate each school site. I think it's important that we're looking at each school site in terms of safety. But I think that it's bigger than that. So I had a student forum last spring, and that was one of the issues that came up from students that I talked to. And I was really, it was almost emotional to hear. Some of the students I talked to were talking about how they're fearful of sitting out in the quad, like at lunchtime, that the thoughts going on in their head or what's been happening across our country. And I think sometimes we forget that not just do we need to make sure that our schools are safe from a, from a perspective of making sure that there's, one entry point and things like that, but we also need to address the fact that our students don't feel safe and why they don't feel safe and what we can do about that. And that goes to our need to make sure that we are prioritizing the social and emotional needs of our students. That's just one aspect of it. And then I think also when we talk about safety and security, we also just have to look at the condition of some of our schools that are very old. Safety is beyond security, right? Safety is, am I sitting in a classroom that is falling apart, or is this an environment that's conducive to me learning, where I can focus on learning and not what's happening in the building around me?
What is your opinion about the fiscal management of the board currently? Would you change the distribution of the budget if you were elected, and how?
I think one of the things that I would bring to the board is a fresh set of eyes and a new perspective. And I think that is desperately needed in our district. We are dealing with a looming budget deficit. I think we need to start looking at our spending habits and things that we have done time over time, year after year. And are there ways we can be changing that to eliminate some of the funds that we're spending? Also, we need to make sure we're building in transparency into the process. So, for example, we had one issue this year where one of the existing current board members spent funds, district funds, without telling even other board members, and spent money on outside counsel in order to do that. That's just unacceptable. As a board member, you should be completely transparent with what you are spending in terms of district funds. And I think that we need to make sure our community has a better idea of how funds are being used and what they're going towards. So that goes back to having board members that are open with our community, and that also can look at a budget and ask critical questions. One of the things that strikes me when I'm sitting at board meetings is they'll be going through finances and no one's asking questions. No one's asking, what does this mean? Why are we spending this? Can we do this differently? We're just approving things and moving on. And that to me is just an outward symbol of board members who are not putting in the effort that's needed for their job.
What is your opinion on the current student enrollment levels, and how would you promote them?
Well, so we know our student enrollment levels continue to decline. And that's an issue for many reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is that it's tied to funding. So as our enrollment declines, so does our funding. I think it also sends a message of the fact that people are choosing not to go to the public schools in our district. So we do have some attempts to get data when people choose to leave the district, and I think we need to really ramp up that process. We need to know exactly why people are choosing to leave, whether it's to go to a neighboring public school district, whether it's homeschooling, or choosing to put their kids in private schools. And we have a lot of issues that have come up. There have been issues with people being able to get childcare, which is huge for working families. We have families who have kids with special needs who don't feel that they can find a right fit for their student. I've talked to families who have moved their child around to 3 different schools in elementary school because they're trying to find a fit for their child that has special needs. We need to be addressing that up front so we're avoiding that shift for those students, and eventually we're losing them. And then there are also families that are looking for programs that our district doesn't offer. So one example that was brought up to me was a language immersion program. So we need to start thinking about these things and what we can offer in CVUSD that will retain the students we have, but also attract new families to our schools so we can get those enrollment numbers and our funding back up.
How do you think schools should balance education for students and emotional and mental well-being?
So for me, social and emotional well-being is a huge component of our public education. It should be. There have been studies that show when students have less social and emotional well-being issues, their academics improve. But beyond that, we know that students are dealing with issues that are still stigmatized. There are many students that still don't feel comfortable talking about issues that they're dealing with, which is just really sad because it's something many people deal with. But we need to do a better job at addressing it. We need to be able to have the resources and prioritize it as an issue so that we are identifying the needs in students as early as possible, because that increases their ability to work through some of these issues. And then when they are identified, we need to make sure that we're providing service to them on campus. So a lot of families, once their child is identified as having a particular need have to go off campus, which is logistically difficult for many families, and have to pay financially out of pocket, which is also obviously very difficult for many families, and we're missing addressing those needs. So there are ways that we can incorporate social and emotional well-being into our classrooms, but we have to also do things like decrease our counselor to student ratio so that students are getting the support and so that our teachers are able to teach and know that they have support in other areas to help kids with these issues. And frankly, as a community, we should be really concerned that we are giving our students the tools and the abilities that they need as they get older, because life doesn't get easier, So we need to be making sure that we're giving our students the tools to deal with these types of things, to ask for help, and to know what they can do to minimize some of what they're feeling and experiencing from these issues.
What other issues do you feel are important that we haven't mentioned yet that you'd like to discuss?
So we talked about declining. Well, we talked about 2 of the 3 that are some of the main issues I'm focused on. The one that we didn't touch on is the achievement gap. So we have an identified achievement gap for 3 categories of students: students with disabilities or special needs, students from socioeconomically disadvantaged areas, and then English learners. And I think a lot of times in our district, we live in a great area. We forget that there are kids that are dealing with things that are different from our general student population. And I think that those groups fall by the wayside. And it's unfortunate, and we have to address it. So there are schools in our district. One of our elementary schools over the last year was able to decrease the achievement gap pretty substantially. And they did things like bringing technology into the classroom that helped their English learners, and they offered English classes for parents of students in the school and kind of bridged that gap, and they were able to decrease that achievement gap. So I think we need to start looking at innovative ways to help these categories of students and bring up their achievement, because we can't forget about them because we're doing good in other areas. We have seen that we've started to put more focus on our special needs area. The Special Education District Advisory Committee was put back in place, which is extremely important. And we need to find ways to help those students succeed to the best of their abilities as well.
That's all of our questions.
Okay. And then can I add one more thing? Because it's I don't list it as my top 3 issues, but we talked about it before in the other interview that for me, I think we need to find a more formal process for hearing from our students. So one of the things I think we should do is look at getting a student appointed to sit on the board. And there's a way we can do that through California law. They would have an advisory vote, and at least we're getting some formal feedback from students that way. It's also been mentioned that we could set up a student advisory board that would give feedback to the board. That voice gets lost. And I can tell you just from the one session I had over spring, I learned so much more about our district just from having a very casual conversation with students, and we're missing out on that opportunity. So I think we need to address it this next coming year.